They came to take the estate. They left with 24 hours and nothing else. The sound of my father's palm against my face echoed louder than the thunder rolling across the 12-acre estate outside the windows. It wasn't the pain that stunned me. It was the certainty behind it. The entitlement. The belief that I was nothing more than property. "Sign the deed, Evan," my brother, Landon Hale, said calmly, sliding a silver pen across the dark walnut table. "You've always been the background person. You don't get to wear the crown." I tasted blood and copper in my mouth, but I stayed silent. Across from me, Mr. Caldwell, the family attorney, had been quiet for almost an hour. His fingers rested on a leather folder. His eyes were sharp, alert, the eyes of a man who knew something no one else in the room wanted to hear. He leaned forward slightly. "Do you know who actually?" He stopped himself. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to drown in. And in that silence, I realized something painful and simple. For 24 years, I had been the only honest person in that room. To understand that strike, you have to understand the 20 years that came before it. I grew up in Ravenmore House, a massive stone estate on the edge of the Hudson Valley, old money, iron gates, private roads, and secrets in every hallway. To the outside world, we were the Hale family, respected investors, owners of shipping routes, private equity firms, and foreign land holdings. But inside those walls, there was a hierarchy. And I was at the bottom. My brother Landon was everything I wasn't: confident, admired, ruthless. He spoke loudly, laughed loudly, and took everything loudly. My father, Richard Hale, worshipped him. They traveled together: Monaco, Dubai, Aspen. Private jets. Charity galas. Boardrooms and champagne. And then there was me. I stayed. When my other parent, Marlene, began losing her memory, when the doctors called it early onset dementia, when the nurses quit one by one, I stayed. I changed her sheets. I managed her medication. I read her financial reports when she could no longer focus. I held her hand at night when she forgot where she was and cried because she couldn't remember her own name. For 3 years, I became a caregiver, an accountant, and a shield. While Landon and Richard were finding themselves on yachts and coastlines, I was learning how to inject medication, balance offshore accounts, and calm panic attacks at 3 a.m. Richard called once a month. Not to ask about Marlene. To ask why a wire transfer was late. When Marlene passed away 3 weeks ago, my grief hadn't even settled before they arrived. They didn't come to mourn. They came to collect. They walked through Ravenmore House like strangers in a hotel, complaining about the smell of medicine, tagging furniture for auction, discussing developers and golf courses and profit margins. The estate was valued at $9.7 million. Land. Accounts. Trusts. Offshore holdings. Everything. And there was one problem. 6 months before Marlene's death, the deed had been updated. For legal reasons, my signature was required for any transfer of ownership. That's why they called this a family meeting. That's why we were sitting in the library that night. That's why I was bleeding from my mouth. Landon sat across from me in a tailored black suit that cost more than my college tuition. He looked bored. "Evan," he said, fake warmth in his voice, "you're not built for this kind of responsibility. You like quiet. You like simple living. This estate needs leadership. Vision. Authority." He slid the pen closer. "Sign the deed. I'll give you a monthly allowance. You'll never have to work again." "An allowance?" I asked quietly. "I've been running this house for 3 years. I managed medical staff, payroll, audits, and compliance while you were on yachts." Richard slammed his glass on the table. "Don't raise your voice at your brother. You were a caretaker. A helper. Nothing more. Your other parent was not in their right mind when they gave you any authority. This family has a face, and it's not yours." "Sign," he said. I shook my head. "No." The word was small. But it changed the air. "What did you say?" Richard whispered. I said no. "I'm not signing. This house mattered to Marlene. You want to sell it to developers. I won't let you." That's when he stood up. And struck me. "You have no choice," Richard said coldly. "Sign, or I'll have you removed from this house tonight. You live here by my permission alone." My face burned. My hands shook. And I looked at Mr. Caldwell. He cleared his throat. And quietly said the words that would destroy everything they believed. Do you know who actually funded this entire estate? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Do you know who actually funded this entire estate? No one moved. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the tall Gothic windows of Ravenmore House. The storm felt deliberate, like it had arrived just to witness this moment. Richard Hale's confidence flickered. Just for a second. What are you implying, Caldwell? My father asked, his voice tight. My grandfather built this company from nothing. That's the version everyone remembers, Mr. Caldwell replied calmly. But it isn't the complete one. Landon scoffed, crossing his arms. This is absurd. You're entertaining his fantasy now. Mr. Caldwell reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a single folder, aged, yellowed, sealed with red wax. This document predates all current holdings, he said. It was filed quietly, deliberately, and legally. He placed it on the table. And slid it toward me. Not toward Richard. Not toward Landon. Toward me. My pulse roared in my ears as I opened it. Inside was a trust charter. Dated 25 years ago. Established by Marlene Whitaker Hale, my biological parent. The room went completely still. That's impossible, Richard snapped. Marlene had nothing. She married into this family. She did not, Caldwell said evenly. She inherited a private shipping settlement after the Whitaker Consortium dissolved. She never publicized it. She never mixed it with Hale Holdings. Landon's face drained of color. You're lying. Caldwell didn't flinch. The trust was structured so the assets could only pass through direct lineage, he continued. Not marriage. Not influence. Bloodline only. I felt dizzy. All my life, I'd been told Marlene was fragile. Dependent. Lucky to be taken in. A burden. She protected you, Caldwell said, finally looking at me. She knew what this family was capable of. That's why she structured it this way. Richard stood up so fast his chair scraped across the marble floor. You're saying this estate belongs to Evan, Caldwell finished. It always has. The words didn't feel real. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly, cruelly. Landon shook his head, laughing once, sharp and brittle. This is manipulation. You're trying to confuse him. I'm explaining the law, Caldwell said. And the law is very clear. Richard turned toward me. Slowly. His eyes weren't angry anymore. They were calculating. You knew? He asked. I shook my head. No. And for the first time, I meant it. I had lived in this house for decades believing I was tolerated. Useful. Disposable. You don't need to sign anything, Caldwell said softly. The deed transferred automatically when Marlene passed. Tonight was never about paperwork. It was about intimidation, I said. Richard's jaw tightened. Landon leaned forward now, his voice sharp. You think you can take this from us? You think you deserve it because you played nurse? I played guardian, I replied quietly. While you played heir. The shift in the room was physical. Like gravity had changed direction. Richard exhaled slowly, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Evan, he said, tone warm and false. We're still a family. This doesn't need to be hostile. I stood up. My legs trembled, but my voice didn't. You struck me. Silence. You threatened to have me removed from my own home. More silence. You let me believe I was nothing. Richard's smile cracked. That was discipline. No, I said. That was control. I turned to Caldwell. If I am the sole owner, what does that make them? Caldwell closed the folder. Guests. Landon shot to his feet. You wouldn't dare. I met his gaze. You taught me something without realizing it, I said. Power only works if people believe you deserve it. I looked around the room, at the art, the furniture, the books. At the house I had protected while they abandoned it. You have 24 hours, I said calmly. Richard stared at me. For what? To pack what's actually yours, I answered. Personal belongings only. Everything else stays. That's insane, Landon snapped. Where are we supposed to go? I tilted my head. You still have the city condo. The one you bought with trust funds you weren't authorized to use. His mouth opened. Closed. Richard's face darkened. You're making a mistake. No, I said. I'm correcting one. I turned toward the door. Behind me, I heard glass shatter. I didn't look back. Because I already knew. They weren't done. They were just done pretending. The silence after the attorney spoke felt unnatural, like the house itself had stopped breathing. I stayed seated, my palm still resting on the table, my cheek warm where the strike had landed. I did not move to touch it. Pain was temporary. Information was permanent. Say that again, Marjorie said quietly. Her voice had lost its sharpness. What replaced it was fear. Across from me, Evan leaned forward in his chair, elbows pressing into his tailored jacket. The confidence he'd worn all evening cracked, just enough to reveal something desperate underneath. This is nonsense, he said. You're confused. My grandfather built the shipping firm. Everyone knows that. Mr. Holbrook, the attorney, didn't look at him. Instead, he opened his briefcase and removed a single, aging folder. The edges were soft, the color uneven, as though it had been handled carefully for decades. I'm not confused, he said. I'm precise. He placed the folder on the table but didn't open it yet. 30 years ago, he continued, the original company collapsed under debt and legal exposure. Public filings confirm it. What followed was not a recovery, but a reinvention. Marjorie's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. Arthur's former partner, Holbrook went on, his first spouse, established a private trust. Entirely independent. Entirely legal. Quiet by design. I felt something shift in my chest, not pain, not relief. Recognition. I had lived inside this house for decades without knowing who had truly built it. Evan laughed sharply. You're saying a ghost funded all of this? Holbrook finally looked at him. I'm saying your relative believed in protecting bloodline over appearances. He opened the folder. Inside were copies of bank records, trust documents, handwritten addendums. Dates. Signatures. The trust was structured so that the assets could only be claimed by direct lineage, Holbrook said. No spouses. No step relations. No exceptions. Marjorie stood abruptly. You expect me to believe I lived here for 20 years without owning it? You lived here, Holbrook replied evenly. Yes. She turned toward me then. Her eyes were searching, not apologetic, calculating. You knew? She asked. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. I was told the trust didn't exist. That was true. I had been raised to believe I was tolerated, not anchored. Holbrook closed the folder and slid it toward me. The final clause activated when Arthur passed, he said. You became sole legal owner the moment the certificate was filed. The word owner didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy. Evan pushed back from the table. This is manipulation. You're turning him against us. No, Holbrook said. History did that. I stood. Not abruptly. Not theatrically. Just enough to remind them that gravity had shifted. All these years, I said quietly, you told me I stayed because I was useful. Marjorie swallowed. You told me my presence was charity. She opened her mouth. I stayed because someone had to, I continued. Someone had to listen when his memory broke. Someone had to notice when funds moved without explanation. Evan's eyes flicked toward me. I noticed. I managed the accounts, I said. I kept records. I noticed withdrawals that didn't align with care expenses. Evan's jaw tightened. Don't, he said. I didn't say anything then, I replied. I didn't need to. I looked at Holbrook. What happens now? I asked. As sole title holder, he said, you control residency, assets, and access. Marjorie stepped forward. We're family, she said, her voice trembling into something rehearsed. This doesn't need to get ugly. I met her gaze. It already did, I said. Just not loudly. The clock on the mantel ticked. Once. Twice. I want no confrontation, I said. No police. No shouting. Evan exhaled in relief. I want clarity. His relief faded. You have 24 hours, I said calmly. To gather what belongs to you personally. Marjorie stared at me. You're removing us? I'm restoring balance, I said. You were never owners. You were occupants. Silence again. This time, it obeyed me. The house did not erupt after my decision. That surprised them. They expected shouting, threats, spectacle. What they received instead was procedure. I spent that night in the West Study, the one overlooking the garden Arthur had designed when his hands were still steady. I slept for less than 2 hours, not from fear, but from clarity. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw numbers aligning, doors closing, systems obeying. At precisely 6:45 a.m., my phone vibrated. Holbrook. They've been notified, he said. Bank access is suspended. Vehicle registrations reverted to estate control. Property access will shift by noon. Good, I replied. No announcements. Of course. I ended the call and sat quietly as sunlight filtered through the tall windows. For the first time in years, the house felt neutral. Not hostile. Not demanding. By 8, the first reaction arrived. Evan burst into the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's jacket, his hair undone, eyes sharp with disbelief. You froze the cards, he said. Yes. You can't do that without warning. I did, I replied, pouring coffee. Yesterday. He slammed his hand on the counter. You're enjoying this. I met his reflection in the window. No, I said. I'm finishing it. He stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. You think this makes you powerful? I think power, I said evenly, is the ability to stop reacting. He scoffed. You'll regret humiliating us. I turned. You weren't humiliated, I said. You were corrected. He opened his mouth to respond, but his phone rang. He answered. Paused. His expression changed, not to anger, but confusion. What do you mean it's inactive? He snapped. Try again. Silence. His shoulders stiffened. Across the hall, I heard drawers opening. Marjorie was already packing. She didn't speak to me until noon. By then, the house systems had transitioned. Codes reset. Keys archived. Staff informed, politely, discreetly, that they now answered to me alone. Marjorie approached me in the foyer, holding a small case. You could have warned us earlier, she said softly. I didn't look at the case. You were warned for 20 years, I replied. Her eyes hardened. You always exaggerate. No, I said. I documented. She inhaled sharply. You think people will side with you? I think, I said, people side with stability. Her voice dropped. You'll be alone. I considered that. I already was, I said. The movers arrived mid-afternoon. Not dramatic. No sirens. Just quiet efficiency. Evan stood on the steps watching them load luggage, designer bags, art purchases, things bought with funds he never questioned. This house will rot without us, he muttered. I stepped beside him. It won't, I said. It will rest. He looked at me then, not with hatred, but something closer to disbelief. You're not weak, he said. I never was, I replied. I was patient. The final moment came without ceremony. Marjorie paused at the door. You'll regret choosing this path, she said. I nodded. Every path has a cost, I replied. This one just stopped charging interest. They left. The door closed. The silence that followed was not empty. It was earned. The fallout didn't arrive like a storm. It crept in. It began with missed calls. Numbers I recognized but didn't answer. Then emails, long, carefully worded messages filled with concern, confusion, sudden affection. People who had never asked how Arthur was during his illness now wanted updates on my well-being. I archived them all. By the second day, the social shift became visible. Invitations were quietly rescinded. Luncheons postponed. Names removed from guest lists. Evan's circle, once loud and crowded, began to thin. Not because I spoke, but because others did. Money has a sound when it moves. And an echo when it stops. Holbrook called in the evening. They're attempting to reframe the narrative, he said. Claiming emotional distress. Misunderstanding. I smiled faintly. Of course. They may attempt mediation. No, I said. They'll attempt control. He paused. You're holding remarkably steady. I spent decades practicing, I replied. That night, I walked through the estate alone. Every room held a memory, but not all memories demanded grief. Some simply asked to be acknowledged. The East Hall, where Arthur once stood correcting my posture as I learned to read financial reports at 13. The kitchen, where he'd sit quietly at night, confusion clouding his eyes, trusting me to translate the world for him. I hadn't inherited wealth. I had inherited responsibility. And responsibility, I had learned, does not require cruelty to be enforced. On the third day, Evan showed up again. No warning. No appointment. The gate camera caught him pacing before I allowed entry. He entered the study without sitting. "They're cutting us off," he said flatly. "Yes. You can't expect us to just disappear." "I don't," I replied. "I expect you to adapt." His jaw tightened. "You always talk like this, like you're above emotion." "I'm not above it," I said. "I'm past negotiating with it." He leaned forward. "Do you know what they're saying about you?" "I know," I said. "And I know who's listening." Silence stretched. Then his voice softened, dangerously. "We're still connected," he said. "No legal document changes that." I met his eyes. "Connection requires consent." He recoiled slightly. "You think this makes you righteous?" "No," I said. "It makes me finished." He laughed bitterly. "You'll end up isolated." "Isolation," I replied, "is different from peace." He left without another word. That evening, Marjorie sent a letter. Handwritten. Carefully slanted script. It spoke of misunderstanding. Of shared history. Of forgiveness. She never apologized. I placed the letter in a drawer with the rest of the evidence I no longer needed. By the end of the week, the truth had settled into the city quietly. Not as scandal, but as correction. People noticed patterns. Who had cared for Arthur? Who had stayed? Who had vanished when effort was required? I didn't explain myself. I didn't defend my decisions. I let time do the work they never could. Late one night, I stood on the terrace, watching lights flicker across the valley. I realized something then, something unexpected. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even relieved. I was clear. Clarity doesn't shout. It simply removes options. And theirs were gone. The final confirmation came on a Monday morning. No confrontation. No raised voices. No dramatic scenes. Just a certified envelope. Inside were 3 documents. The first confirmed the permanent transfer of all assets into my sole authority, uncontested and finalized. The second detailed the termination of all allowances, accounts, and proxy access previously extended to Evan and Marjorie. The third was a brief notice: no further claims would be pursued. It was over. Not because they surrendered, but because they had nothing left to stand on. I signed where required, sealed the envelope, and placed it beside the window. Outside, the estate grounds were calm. Maintained. Alive. For the first time, the house felt like a home rather than a battleground. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I walked to the West Wing, rooms that had been locked for years. Arthur's study. The reading nook. The small guest room where I slept during his final months so I could hear him if he called out at night. I opened the windows. Fresh air moved through spaces long held closed by fear and obligation. People often believe justice must be loud to be satisfying. They're wrong. True justice feels like balance returning to a system that's been skewed for too long. Weeks passed. No messages came. No apologies followed. And that, too, was information. I converted the estate gradually, not into something grander, but something truer. The southern wing became a rehabilitation and respite residence, quiet rooms for those who had cared for others until they forgot themselves. Caregivers. Nurses. People like I had been, unseen and expected to endure. I didn't put my name on a plaque. I didn't need recognition. I needed meaning. One afternoon, Holbrook visited again. He walked slowly, observing the changes. "You know," he said, "most people in your position would have used the law to punish." "I used it to conclude," I replied. He nodded. "That's rarer." We stood in silence. "Do you regret not confronting them one last time?" he asked. I thought about Evan's certainty. Marjorie's entitlement. The years of quiet labor dismissed as weakness. "No," I said. "They already heard everything. They just never listened." Later that evening, I received a single text from an unknown number. "You think you won?" I stared at it for a long moment. Then deleted it. Winning implies competition. This was release. On the anniversary of Arthur's passing, I walked the grounds alone at dawn. Mist settled low across the grass. Birds moved gently through the trees. I spoke aloud, not to the past, but to myself. I did it the way you would have wanted, I said. Not with anger. Not with destruction. But with permanence. I understood then what had truly changed. I no longer measured my worth against their approval. I no longer needed to prove endurance. I had become someone who could choose quiet over chaos. Boundaries over fear. Completion over conflict. That was the inheritance. Not the estate. Not the money. But the freedom to decide who remains in my life, and who becomes a closed chapter. As I returned to the house, sunlight broke through the trees, warming the stone beneath my feet. For the first time, nothing followed me. No expectation. No shadow. Just space. And in that space, peace finally had room to exist. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Have a nice day.